My name is Margaret Hayes, and at 72 years old, I thought I'd seen everything life could throw at me. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday morning in June. The phone rang while I was watering my orchids, the ones my late husband Robert had given me 30 years ago. They still bloomed every spring, faithful as sunrise. "Mom, we're leaving tomorrow." It was my daughter Diane, her voice tight with something I couldn't quite name. "Leaving? Where are you going, sweetheart?" "The beach house." "Your beach house? It's old." I set down my watering can carefully, very carefully. "You forgot something, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice steady. There was a pause. Then, hesitantly, "What are you talking about?" "The house she sold," I said slowly, "was actually mine." The silence on the other end stretched like taffy. 25 years earlier, Robert and I had been married for 30 years when we found that beach house. It was small, weathered, with blue shutters that needed painting and a porch that creaked when you walked across it. But oh, the view! The Atlantic stretched out before it like an endless promise. "We'll retire here," Robert had said, his arm around my waist as we stood on that creaky porch. "We'll watch the sunrise every morning and fall asleep to the sound of waves." We bought it with money I'd inherited from my mother, put it in my name only because Robert's business was going through some difficulties. He assured me it was temporary. I trusted him. "Loved as that to you." For 10 years, that house was our sanctuary. Diane would visit with her husband Paul and their 2 boys. We'd build sandcastles and roast marshmallows and tell stories until the stars came out. Then came the summer that changed everything. I'd driven up to the beach house early that July, eager to open it up for the season. Robert was supposed to join me on Friday, but something told me to arrive on Thursday instead. Call it intuition, call it God's whisper, call it whatever you like. The red convertible and the driveway wasn't familiar. Neither were the sounds coming from the bedroom, my bedroom, the one where Robert and I had whispered our dreams and held each other through storms. Her name was Valerie. She worked in Robert's office. She was 42. She called my husband Bobby. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Not then. I simply stood in the doorway and said, "I'll give you 10 minutes to get dressed and leave." Robert sputtered excuses. She was a mistake. It meant nothing. He loved me. All the predictable words that unfaithful husbands say when they're caught with their pants literally down. I want a divorce, I told him that evening, sitting on the porch we'd chosen together, looking at the sunset we'd watched 100 times. Robert fought the divorce for 2 years. He had expensive lawyers and arguments about business investments and community property. But the beach house stayed mine. It was in my name only, bought with my mother's money. Even his lawyers couldn't touch that. What I didn't know was that Robert was working a longer game. Through Diane, he'd been poisoning her mind for years, painting himself as a victim. Margaret had changed, he'd tell her. Margaret had become cold and unforgiving. A man makes one mistake, and his wife throws away 40 years of marriage. Diane, my beautiful, trusting Diane, believed him. Love makes fools of us all, daughters included. After Robert died 5 years ago, heart attack at 68, Diane's relationship with me grew strained. She'd call less often, visit rarely. When she did come, she'd make little comments about forgiveness and moving on. "Dad really loved you, Mom," she'd say. "He made a mistake, but we all make mistakes." I'd nod and change the subject. Some wounds don't heal just because people want them to. What I discovered that Tuesday, after Diane's phone call, was that she'd been planning her revenge for months. Revenge for the father she thought I'd wronged. She'd found a buyer for the beach house, convinced them to put down a substantial deposit, forged my signature on the sales documents, had the whole thing set up through a lawyer friend of her husband's. She planned to take the money and disappear with her family to Arizona, where Paul had a job offer. A fresh start, funded by what she saw as her inheritance. There was only one problem with her plan. I still had the original deed, and I'd never signed a single paper. I didn't call Diane back right away. Instead, I called my lawyer, Patricia Chen, who'd been my friend since college. Within 3 hours, we had all the documentation we needed. Then I called my grandson, Marcus, Diane's oldest boy. He was 28 now, working as a teacher in Boston. He'd always been my confidant, the one who saw through his mother's anger. "Grandma, what's going on?" he asked when I explained the situation. "I need you to trust me, sweetheart. Can you come to the beach house tomorrow morning, early, before your mother gets there?" He promised he would. I arrived at the beach house at dawn. Marcus was already there, sitting on the porch steps with 2 cups of coffee. Bless that boy. Diane and Paul showed up at 9, pulling up in their loaded SUV, the boys in the back. She climbed out with confidence, keys jingling in her hand. The keys didn't work, of course. I'd changed the locks the day before. "Mom," Diane called out, seeing me on the porch. "What are you doing here?" "I live here now," I said calmly. "Moved in yesterday, permanently." Her face went through several colors. "You can't. The house is sold. The closing is next week." "Is it?" I stood up slowly, Patricia Chen stepping out from inside the house behind me. "Funny thing about selling property, you actually need the owner's signature. The real signature, not a forged one." Diane's face went white. Paul grabbed her arm. "You want to know what your father really was, Diane?" I said, my voice steady but firm. "He wasn't a man who made one mistake. Valerie was the 3rd woman I knew about, the 3rd, and he stole from his business partners, which is why we almost lost everything." "You're lying," Diane whispered. Marcus stood up from the steps. "She's not lying, Mom. I found Dad's diary last year when we were cleaning out his office. I didn't know how to tell you." What happened next took 3 hours. We sat on that porch, all of us, while Marcus shared what he'd found. Love letters from multiple women, evidence of Robert's embezzlement, his plans to leave me once he'd secured enough money. The only thing that had saved our finances was my mother's inheritance and the beach house, which Robert had tried repeatedly to access but couldn't. Diane cried. Paul looked stunned. Their younger son, Christopher, who was 25, held his mother while she sobbed. "Why didn't you tell me?" Diane finally asked, her voice broken. "Because he was your father," I said gently. "And you loved him. I couldn't take that away from you. Even after he tried to turn you against me, I couldn't do that to you." Here's what I didn't tell Diane that day. I'd known about her plan for weeks. A friend at the title company had tipped me off when the fraudulent documents came through. I could have had her arrested. Forgery, fraud, attempted theft, these are serious crimes. Patricia had laid it all out for me. Instead, I made a different choice. "The deposit you got from those buyers," I said to Diane as the sun climbed higher, "that's going back to them, with my apologies and an additional amount for their trouble." "Patricia has already drafted the paperwork." Diane nodded miserably. "But the Arizona job offer Paul has, that's a good opportunity. And you need a fresh start, all of you. Just not funded by stealing from me." I reached onto my bag and pulled out an envelope. "This is a loan, enough for your moving expenses and 3 months of living costs in Arizona. You'll pay me back when you can, with no interest. Consider it an investment in my grandson's future." Diane stared at the envelope like it might bite her. "Why?" she whispered. After what I tried to do, I sat down beside my daughter and took her hand. It was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe mine had gotten larger with age. "Because revenge is a poison that kills the person who drinks it," I said. "Your father hurt me deeply, Diane, but I survived. I thrived. And I won't become bitter and cruel just because he was unfaithful and you were misguided." I squeezed her hand gently. "You're still my daughter. You made a terrible choice, influenced by lies and grief, but one bad choice doesn't define a life. I learned that lesson the hard way." Patricia Chen, bless her practical heart, stepped forward. "There are conditions, of course. Diane will need to complete community service and counseling, and she'll sign documents acknowledging the fraud attempt, which we'll keep sealed unless there's another incident." Diane nodded, tears streaming down her face. "The beach house now." That was 3 years ago. Diane and her family did move to Arizona. Paul's job worked out well. The boys visited me last summer, spent 2 weeks helping me repaint those blue shutters and fix the porch. Diane calls every Sunday now. We talk about ordinary things, mostly her garden, my book club, Christopher's new girlfriend. Sometimes we talk about Robert. Diane understands now who he really was, and she's made her peace with it. She paid back the loan in full last year, even though I told her there was no rush. As for me, I wake up every morning in my beach house and watch the sunrise, just like Robert and I planned, except now I do it on my terms. surrounded by the truth instead of buried in lies. Marcus visits often. He's engaged now to a lovely woman named Sarah. They're planning to get married on the beach here next spring. Sometimes Diane sends me pictures of Arizona sunsets. They're beautiful, she tells me, but not as beautiful as Atlantic sunrises. Here's what I've learned in my 75 years. Betrayal comes in many forms, from many directions, even from the people we love most. The question isn't whether we'll be betrayed, it's what we'll do when we are. We can choose revenge, which feels satisfying for a moment but leaves us hollow. We can choose bitterness, which protects our hearts but closes them off from joy. Or we can choose something harder and braver. We can choose wisdom, understanding, the kind of love that sees people clearly, faults and all, and still offers grace. Not because they deserve it, necessarily, but because we deserve to live without the weight of hatred in our hearts. The beach house she tried to sell, it wasn't just wood and nails and ocean views. It was my mother's gift, my independence, my proof that I could survive anything. And I did survive. I'm still here, still watching the sunrise, still believing that kindness matters more than revenge, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That's the truth I wanted Diane to understand, and eventually, thank God, she did.